Good evening, USC Trojans, and welcome to Sustainability and Impact Investing and day 4 of our Financial Literacy Conference. My name is Lori Shreve Blake, and I'm the Senior Director for Career Engagement at the USC Career Center. And we want to start by recognizing our silver as well as our gold partners for this conference. Without their financial support, we wouldn't be able to do this conference. And so we really appreciate our employer partners and their engagement with the Career Center and their investment in hiring USC Trojans. Next slide. Also, we wanted to say for the students that are on this call, it's survey time. April is not just Financial Literacy Month, it's also survey time at the Career Center. And so on my left, you'll see our summer experience survey. There's a QR code there. We'd love to know what your plans are this summer. If you're still looking for an internship, we have a boot camp that we're hosting on April 16th that you can register for. And then for our graduating seniors, those class of 2024 that will graduate in May and also in August. We'd love for you to fill out our first destination survey and tell us what your post-graduation plans are. If you need help, we also have help for you. We have a boot camp that we're hosting on May 16th. So at this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce one of our most esteemed alumni in the financial services world and financial expertise. And our speaker for tonight, if you haven't been to Investing 101 or to Investing 102, if this is your first time, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Mimi Shih. This is her third lecture that she's hosting for the conference, and we're so pleased and grateful that she's donating so much of her time and sharing her expertise with the USC Trojan family. Mimi Shih is a private advisor, vice president at Rockefeller Capital Management. Mimi began her wealth management career in Vancouver, Canada at CIBC Wood Gunny, advising domestic and international ultra-high net worth individuals on tax-efficient, traditional and non-traditional investing. She then joined Orcs Legacy Partners, where her responsibilities included reviewing portfolio strategies, reviewing ESG and impact strategies, and relationship management for notable families, foundations, and institutions. Mimi received her BSc from the University of Southern California Marshall School of Business and her MBA from the University of Toronto Rotman School of Management. Mimi serves on Reaching Out MBA Advisory Council and is the co-chair of the Rotman New York City Alumni Club. For her contributions to women and the LGBTQ+ community, Mimi was recognized as a Forte and Romba Fellow. Mimi is a frequent speaker at conferences on topics ranging from portfolio management to community engagement. A strong proponent of giving back to the community, Mimi mentors students at the University of Southern California. Mimi enjoys pushing her limits and has run not one, not two, but 3 international marathons and is originally from Taiwan. Mimi has lived in Vancouver, Los Angeles, Shanghai, and Toronto, and she now resides in Manhattan with her dog, Mocha. Please join me in giving a warm virtual Trojan welcome to our esteemed speaker for this evening, Mimi Shih.
Thank you, Lori. It is a pleasure to be back. This is night number 3. Here we go, everyone. Thanks for joining the Sustainability and Impact Investing seminar. Let's pull up the screen here. And just to touch up on what Lori mentioned earlier, LA was my second favorite marathon, not the first, because that one has to go to Tokyo. Anyway, so sustainability and impact investing. This is more of a niche topic that we'll be touching upon today. On the first day, we did Investing 101, second day 201, and now we're doing sustainability and impact investing. In the media recently, there has been some chatter on ESG, on sustainability, where there's been backlash. And while this is a developing industry, I think it's still important to get to know, because we're seeing Gen Z and younger generations really take the initiative in setting these sustainability goals and these impact investing goals, because as we all know, greenwashing is something that corporations will do. And if you don't know greenwashing, it really means that they will, and I'll use Pride as an example, they will celebrate Pride, slap on a little rainbow during Pride Month, and then still support anti-LGBTQ initiatives. That is a way to really greenwash, or something that doesn't really mean that they are 100% focused on the efforts. This is also a part of the Rockefeller financial education, where we really engage the next gen on really educating them on various topics: personal finance, planning for the future, wills, trusts, and estates, US tax basics, investing, sustainability and impact, which is today's seminar, philanthropy, and entrepreneurship. So, legacy of Rockefeller Family Office, and why this is something that is interwoven into the firm, really because, and I've chatted with both Lori and Sarah about this, where the Rockefellers have had quite an impact in philanthropy, and it's just interwoven into the history. And I know that it is quite a strong initiative for a lot of the families that the team works with. So when we're looking at sustainability and impact investing, we'll first define sustainability. We'll take a look at ESG and exactly what that means. We'll differentiate sustainability and impact investing. Why is it different? How is it different? Why does it matter? And then we'll provide examples of sustainable and impact investing. And then finally, just a quick sample in terms of how do we integrate this into your portfolio? So what is sustainability? Sustainability is defined as the capable of being sustained, of relating to or being a method of harvesting or using a resource so that the resource is not depleted or permanently damaged. Previously, the term that the industry used that was more prevalent is ESG. It has since morphed to sustainability because it reflects the ability to achieve economic growth without permanent adverse environmental impact, which is what we are really focused on. Now, if anyone has heard of the UN SDGs, this is the United Nations, where they came together and really came up with 17 sustainable development goals. And oftentimes, you'll actually see it on the investments labeled in terms of what exactly they are trying to target with this investment. And you'll see on the left, some of them are focused on no poverty. They have supporting life above water, supporting life on land or below water, climate action, renewable energy, gender equality, and racial advancement as well, minority support as well. Whereas sustainability is the really encompassing umbrella of the environmental, social, and governance that was ESG before. So we're really taking a focus at the people, the planet, and how companies are generating profit. So what do we mean when we're really looking at ESG? ESG is, like I mentioned earlier, it really is more of a, it's like a readout that we're able to provide. It's a readout, it's an analysis based on a company's environmental, social, and governance scores. Typically, you'd be able to run ESG scores alongside your fundamental, your technicals that you would perform on a company. And for those clients who are interested, this is also another way for them to evaluate whether they feel comfortable investing in a firm that may be ranked higher on the ESG score or lower on ESG scores. And just to give you an indication, we've actually had clients who will have blanket blanket exclusions on a few sectors, such as the weapons industry, such as oil. So those are just some of the examples of how we've seen this be employed. So what is ESG? There are proposed legislation that would require public companies to make ESG related disclosures on in their SEC filings. The potential is to really report the E, the S, the G. What does that mean? From an environmental standpoint, we're really looking at carbon emissions and environmental waste. For the S, we're really looking at human rights. How are they treating their employees? And use and protection of consumer data. So really taking a focus on the social aspects of a company, how they handle, again, consumer data, or how they treat their employees. And then G, which is governance, how are they measuring in terms of board diversity and holding them accountable to their actions? And this ties also into the business ethics, because we've all heard of that situation of that darling company that um, is performing really well from a revenue perspective. However, they have poor business ethics and they are not treating their employees very well. So at that point, it really is an inflection point for some individuals to really think about whether they want to continue to be invested in that company. So ESG again is a reporting framework, and just to give you an idea of what is available, what kind of frameworks we have: the Global Reporting Initiative, Carbon Disclosure Project, Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, World Development Indicators, et cetera, and some of the data monitoring organizations, MSCI, as I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, Sustainalytics, RepRisk, ISS, Environmental and Social Quality Score, Dow Jones Sustainable Indices, and Bloomberg, to name a few of them. And what you'll often find is that they will report on controversies that have occurred in the past on the E, S, and G score. And I want everyone to be mindful that this isn't a standard framework that we'll be applying across all companies. So what I mean by that is, if we're really looking at the tech sector, you're not necessarily going to evaluate the tech sector on their environmental score, because the likelihood of them having a negative environmental sustainability or ESG score, sustainability score, is a lot lower because it's tech. Whereas if we were to take a look at, and we'll just go to the other extreme of the example, an oil company, what is their environmental score, and how does that measure up over time, and how does that measure up with industry peers? So you'd be comparing them against another competitor within the industry for an apples to apples comparison. So giving just a little history on the evolution of sustainable investing and the primary objective, because oftentimes when people talk about sustainability and impact investing, there is this belief that there has to be a trade-off, that in order to do good in the world, you have to make financial sacrifices. And that's not necessarily the case. You can have financial return as well as making a positive impact on the world. So when we're thinking about socially responsible and exclusionary, so I mentioned earlier, really just having a values-based approach. And this one, you would filter out sectors that you don't necessarily feel the most comfortable with investing in. So I previously mentioned weapons. That would be a type of filter. Tobacco is also another type of filter. The returns are often market rate, simply because all we're really doing is eliminating that from the portfolio. And yeah, so there is the example of tobacco products and weapons. I swear I did not look at that beforehand. The next would be ESG integration. We're really looking at financial first. That's a primary objective. We're assessing the ESG risk and opportunities. And then we include the leaders and the improvers. The returns would be market rate, and you would use ESG data to invest in leading ESG companies. What I also want to mention for ESG integration is that, yes, there are the ESG leaders in every category, in every industry. They're the darlings where they do everything really well in the sense that they have great ESG scores. However, I also want to put the spotlight on the ESG improvers. We have a white paper out that really focuses on, and as a function of, if you're really thinking about it, it's you're analyzing it. The ESG score is a snapshot in time of any company and how they're doing on these 3 different metrics. Now, does that necessarily mean that they won't change their ESG score, that they won't make improvements? No. More often than not, you'll find, at least as a team, we do pinpoint. We'll look at specific companies, and we've done case studies on firms where, we block out the name, we talk about some of the controversies that they've had in the past. However, looking at where they are now, 3 years later, what is their score right now from an ESG perspective? And the idea behind this is that they are making changes within the firm. Obviously, change does take time. And with that change, the belief is that they will reap economic benefit from changing their internal policies to be more ESG positive. Then we have thematic. Thematic is, again, financial first. And with thematic investment, you'll really start thinking about investments that are targeted to specific themes. So we're thinking maybe climate change, we're thinking diversity, water stress. It's very solutions oriented. And again, the returns can be market rate. And some of the examples would be, we have a couple of funds that, for example, Rockefeller has a fund that is a climate solutions fund. We've also identified, if anyone has heard of community impact bonds, those are investments that will allow you to actually select which of the underlying initiatives you really care about. And some of them could be minority advancement, poverty alleviation, or economic development. And then you would invest in the bonds that would actually line up with that theme. And finally, we have mission-driven impact investing. And this one is impact first. The investments are made for to have a positive environmental and social impact. The returns aren't as important as the outcome of the impact. And some of the examples here are loans to nonprofits with the primary goal of environmental and social impact. Microfinancing is a good example of what mission-driven impact investing would be. So providing microloans to, for example, women who oftentimes have a harder time finding an appropriate lender. So some of the examples of sustainable and impact themes, just to run these over with you guys. Environmental, climate change, that is right off the bat. Everyone knows climate change. We've got sustainable oceans, renewable energy, waste diversion. So just to give you an idea of what environmental themes would be like. So when you're really looking at an investment and they say that they're sustainable and they say their impact, you really want to make sure that the entire fund is really geared towards what they say they are geared towards. Because oftentimes, there are investments that have come across the desk for us where they slap on the idea of ESG because, again, it is greenwashing. It is labeling it as using the label to generate more revenue for people who aren't really invested in opening the hood and digging a little deeper. So to really make an impact, you really want to focus on, okay, so what is this fund geared towards, aside from just slapping on an ESG sticker? And likewise with impact themes. Social and governance are really looking at education, financial inclusion, gender lens, and diversity. On the team, we'll even go as far as really analyzing the key person of a fund and the board of the fund, as well as the key person of the actual asset management company. Because if the fund, if the strategy really says that they are focused on gender diversity and gender lens and diversity, then you should be able to see it across all levels of the firm. And to again give you an example, a couple of organizations that we work with have a diversity lens. Oftentimes we'll run through before we propose any portfolios, we'll really take a look at, okay, which funds are we really going to propose? How does it align with their IPS? And then we peel a bit farther into, so how does this strategy match up from a diversity perspective, from a gender diversity, from a racial diversity perspective? How do the key people measure up from a gender diversity and racial diversity perspective? And then we'll even do that to the firm to provide the statistics. I have to warn everyone, it's not pretty. Finance is notoriously not as diverse as we hope it to be. However, having those metrics, again, it's a snapshot in time. It doesn't mean that improvements aren't being made. And why does it matter? It might not to some people. I would assume that everyone who is in attendance today, it might matter a little bit, or you're just curious, which is fine as well. But the essence of it really is making sure that your investments are aligned with your values. And the first place is really to know what you own. I could go on and on and on about how Amazon, great company from a revenue perspective, P&L perspective. However, if I started talking to you about how they treat their employees, would that make you think twice about having that in your portfolio? There's also been instances where a previous client that we've been working with is, or a client that we've been working with is, they care only as much as the top 10 largest holdings. As long as the top 10 largest holdings aren't going out there and really just ruining the environment and really harming other people, then it's okay. Like the top 10 holdings aren't nefarious. So when we go back to the starting point, you really want to take a look at your existing portfolio, identify the funds that are aligned or misaligned with your personal views, and then that's also a way for you to really figure out what your values are when it comes to investing. So again, as I mentioned earlier, for that particular client who's focused on the top 10 holdings, some of the areas that she's really passionate about, gender equality, making sure that those companies don't have any egregious social controversies was really important to her. So we'll highlight that in her portfolio analysis. Some of the climate solutions that are available, you're really looking at, the idea behind this is really tackling climate change. So why do people care about this in particular? We've been noticing this over the last couple of years. I'm sure California is a prime example as well in terms of water scarcity, the threat to biodiversity. If anyone goes to the Great Barrier Reef, you're going to notice that the biodiversity has been impacted quite a bit. Rising sea levels and flooding, heat and drought, and endangerment of over 1 million species. And coincidentally, so the team name for us is Oryx, and there is a rationale behind that, because the Oryx used to be an endangered, extinct species. And it was only through conscious effort to bring the species out of extinction and really have the species be amongst us again. And it is a nod to Angela, who is a key partner of the team, where we are focused on sustainability for the clients who really care about sustainability and impact investing. We don't shove it down people's throats, but just to give you a little context in terms of how endangerment may impact your portfolio and your thoughts around what you want to invest in. Water scarcity and heat and drought. So again, these are some of the other issues when it comes to climate solutions, really thinking about the three primary problems, which is lack of sufficient infrastructure, a booming global population, and climate change. And what we are really tackling with this one is 1 in 3 people lack access to safe, readily available drinking water. So when we make an investment targeted towards water scarcity, it is really to address that issue. And likewise with heat and droughts, I'm sure that everyone is well aware, extreme heat conditions will lead to fire weather conditions and how that impacts air quality, wildlife, and forests. So any climate solutions that you invest in really is focused on tackling the water scarcity as well as the heat and drought. Flooding, biodiversity, and endangerment of species. Again, this just goes back to tackling all of the underlying reasons under climate solutions. And you'll oftentimes find investing in climate solutions to be focused on green infrastructure, renewable energy, waste management. There's been multiple funds that I've reviewed and done due diligence on in terms of what is the impact that they are hoping to achieve. And then you get these reports, these impact reports that really go into, okay, so it's been a quarter since the investment, or it's been a quarter since the last report. And what are the advances that we're making with our investments in the innovation in the tech sector that will really focus on climate solutions? And again, net zero, so eliminating carbon emissions, also something that is a great focus for the UN and for a lot of clients that we are working with. And I mentioned this earlier and gave an idea of what diversity in fund managers look like. Just some quick stats: 25% of companies with more gender diverse, they are more than likely to have above average profitability than male dominated firms. Ethnically and culturally diverse companies were 36% more likely than their less diverse peers to outperform in terms of profitability. And companies with more diverse leadership teams reported 9% higher earnings before interest and tax margins compared to their peers. And then again, racial and ethnic diversity are positively correlated. Every 10% increase in diversity results in a 1% increase in EBIT. So really just focusing on diversity in fund managers. And as I mentioned earlier, where we are right now is not where we want to be, especially in the finance sector. I've been in multiple meetings where, there's a lot of talk about, oh, we are leading the sector in terms of diversity. Well, then you also look at them and you really think about, well, how diverse was the sector to begin with? And those are kind of the questions that will come up. And well, I do want to put the focus on also that it's a work in progress. It's not where it should be, but as long as companies are committed and actually developing the mentorship pipeline, having a DEI training, having a diverse pipeline that they can recruit from, those are some of the ways that we can see there be effective change in any industry. So the fun part. What does an ESG integrated portfolio look like? So you'll see here on the right, any growth equity strategy focused on climate solutions, if they have the UN SDG goals, that typically means that, or that does mean that this is what this fund is focused on. We'll even we'll even apply the same metrics to the alternative desk, which is really focused on renewable and clean energy. So we'll also have that presented on any of the manager spotlights. And then again, any impact investing firm focused on women and financial inclusion, we'll also make a note of that and how it is, how this fund is targeted specifically to the listed UN SDG goals. So here we have a sample portfolio, and this is an example of what you might see in a proposal where, for example, you have a $5 million portfolio and your public equities would constitute 60% of the portfolio, whereas your absolute return and risk anchoring would be the fixed income would be 40%. And what you're really looking at is the ESG/impact column right here. And what we will do is we'll highlight the funds that are focused on ESG and impact. So global renewables, global environmental, ESG integrated does not count. So those are the, the ETFs that have an ESG label on it. But unless they are thematic and unless they have, for example, a really high bar for Rockefeller is filing shareholder resolutions. Unless they meet one or the other of those, they're not considered ESG integrated, which means that yes, you hit a lot of the average industry metrics, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you are thematic and that you're really putting your focus on addressing some of the challenges that I spoke about earlier. And again, you can see this being applied to the fixed income as well as the private investments. So there are alternatives, as I mentioned earlier, that will be targeted towards impact investing and ESG. I do want to caveat that we have to be cognizant that there aren't as many available funds out there. Sometimes maybe the idea, the theme that you're really focused on, there hasn't been as many, for example, alternatives that are available. So that is more of okay, we have to keep farming, we have to keep looking at other funds that could come available. So an ESG impact percentage-wise, we want that to be as high as possible, but also recognizing that perhaps with the industry the way that it is, the product is just not available yet. And then finally, to really, as a take home, to really think about if you and your family are really considering sustainability and impact investing, it can oftentimes be a great way to bring everyone together or get into fights. But usually you bring everyone together and you really talk about what values you really care about. Again, referencing the family that we worked with a daughter that had the requirement that the top 10 not be egregious on sustainability scores. They had a very concentrated focus on women advancement, on minority development, developing the economic opportunities for minorities. And those are some of the things that you can only unearth through conversations with the families. And it can be, it's going to require a lot of effort from everyone because this is something that really touches down to the principles of who that individual is. But as long as you're able to remain non-judgmental and really be mindful of your words, and I know it's hard around family, don't get me wrong, but what comes out of it is a list of values and principles that you really adhere to, and then you can really translate that into the portfolio. So next step, if you wanted to take a look at your own portfolio and really analyze how ESG focused it is, how impactful it is, that is something that I would encourage you to do. And I now open it up to any questions on sustainability and impact investing.
Thank you, Mimi. That was very informative. Very, very informative. So we do have some questions in the queue, and I'll start with this first one. I have concerns about some companies on labor practices in third world countries. How can one reconcile these issues with the pursuit of ESG goals?
Right. So it's not a one size fits all. It really works on a spectrum in terms of, as I mentioned on the ESG improvers, how a company does right now, how it's done in the past, is a snapshot in time. It doesn't mean we forget about it, but it also doesn't mean that they aren't making efforts to improve their ESG score. When it comes to controversies in the third world and emerging markets, I would encourage you to, one of the exercises that we did was, again, that case study where, we didn't present the name of the company, and we really discussed, okay, these are some of the mistakes that they've had. Would you feel comfortable investing in them? And when you unveil the company after each member has answered, there can be quite a reaction to what the underlying company is. So it really comes down to a personal perspective, a personal value. Where I mentioned earlier that the daughter that we were working with, they didn't want that in the top 10 holdings. As long as it wasn't in the top 10, they're fine with it. There are just some ways to really consider how you want to approach your portfolio.
Thank you. Another question, this is from a new grad. What is your advice for a new grad to pursue a sustainability investing career path?
I would say read as much as you can. There's a lot of material out there. I know that for foundations, in particular, that is more focused on like theory of change, getting to know the industry jargon, really understanding how different peers are approaching impact investing and sustainable investing. That would be the first step. Yeah. And then even going on MSCI and playing around with their ESG analytics, do some research on companies that Amazon, Tesla, Apple, just to get yourself more aware of the ESG scores of different companies.
Yes, and a good segue to another question is, I actually worked with an employer this past fall who said their CEO stopped their travel because they're trying to get to net zero. So this question, I think, is a good backup question to the first one, which is, how important is ESG to companies right now?
It's the ESG score is being released, and I mentioned earlier that there is proposed legislation on making it a requirement. It's not a requirement right now, but they're making it a requirement for companies to really report on it. And oftentimes the companies, because again, the family that I mentioned earlier that had the daughter whose portfolio we were doing analysis on, the dad is the founder of a software company that is publicly listed. And for him, it wasn't that he didn't want to do anything about it. It was more so he didn't know how to. So even for him, who is, very successful with a publicly listed company, he's even thinking about it. And he was asking us for analytics on his firm to see what improvements he could make.
Very good, very good. Is there a threshold for which businesses are eligible / required to report ESG? It may make more sense for small businesses and mom and pop stores. So is there anything around like small, medium-sized businesses, bigger businesses that can be eligible?
It doesn't really matter from an eligibility standpoint, because how you impact the environment, how you treat your employees, how diverse your board or your employees, the makeup of your workforce is, is something that anyone can readily provide, no matter how big the business is. And like I mentioned earlier, it's if it does get mandated, then everyone would have to, or every listed company would have to report.
Okay, here's another question. Thank you. Most index funds and standard funds include all industries and companies, and there's fewer ESG or impact investing options. Are there any resources you recommend to find these funds?
Yes, so right off the top of my mind, I know that, for example, ESGE, ESGU, ESGD, these are all just some of the tickers that I'm listing because we use them quite a bit. And what they essentially mean is that you're really looking at the S&P 500, but you filter out the companies that aren't ESG friendly. And the same goes for the, the Russell 2000, the small, the mid cap, and they even have one for emerging markets as well as the developed markets. So you're really thinking Europe as well as emerging markets, and they have that ESG tilt.
Okay. Here's another question, and it's really your viewpoint. I heard that microloans and microfinances have been controversial and overused in developing countries, and that it doesn't actually create financial independence for women and low-income people in those countries. What's your view, Mimi?
I think, as with any investment, as with any company, there are going to be the companies that have really invested and are really trying to make an impact. Because on the flip side of companies that we've heard who haven't been as focused and who haven't been as supportive of the demographic they're trying to help, we've heard the flip situation where you're really seeing the difference where they're starting their own small businesses, and the investment will actually profile the people who are benefiting from their services. And I think what you're asking really gets to the point of impact investing. And no one has the right answer. I wish I could tell you that everyone has it figured out or that we all have it figured out. You have some of the smartest people in the world trying to really think about how do you measure impact, because it's so intangible. It's so intangible, and it takes time for the loan that you're giving to this woman who's just really starting off and starting her own company. It takes time for the impact to be really demonstrated. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but this is something that the industry is struggling with.
Thank you. Okay, here's another great one. When talking about thematic investing for climate change, is it about carbon offsets? If so, is that actually effective? If the company's daily processes actually have a lot of environmental impact?
Right. So for climate solutions, we did talk about a lot of the different ways that you could impact climate solutions. Carbon offset is just one of those ways. There is that Paris Accord, I believe, that we're trying to get to net zero. And that is something that the firm is actually really focused on too, where you can measure a company by, like, they'll actually measure the emissions produced by a company, because you can actually measure that, and they'll record they'll make an analysis of it and see after 5 years how that company has progressed. And if they've made positive advancements, you keep that in the portfolio. And as part of the filter that we have is at the 5-year mark, you really question, are we going to keep investing in this company? And surprisingly, or maybe I shouldn't be saying surprisingly, that's kind of that's being a Debbie Downer. You'd actually do see companies make the effort to move towards net zero, which is really, I think it's great to be able to see that.
Great. I know we had this question last night for Investing 201. Now we have it again. Are there any apps or resources or books you recommend for those who are interested in impact investing?
Ooh, I would start off by looking up theory of change, because that's specific to impact investing because it really gets the head around what is it that you're really trying to drive towards. That one is more specific towards foundations and endowments that are really focused on impact investing. But I think just getting to know the terminology around it and the space around it, I would also encourage you to really do some deep dive, and it could be on, even if you look up Google in terms of, really looking at the UNSDGs, which investments are associated with UNSDGs. I can list off a couple of impact investments as well that have been quite interesting for at least the team to take a look at.
Thank you. And this is another question from a student who is has a humanities background and would like to know some information about starting a career in ESG or CSR. What would be your advice for them landing an ESG role?
Again, it's going to be really getting the terminology around the industry. I would encourage you to, and I actually have a couple of resumes that were sent to me, and they're asking to get into a specific industry. And I think the same applies regardless of which industry you're trying to get into. You have to learn the technical terminology. You have to learn the technical terms. If they're asking you how to do valuation, learn how to actually analyze a company, and having those skills, and then really just exposing yourself, perhaps going to conferences, listening to webinars, any of those activities to show that you are dedicated to a career in that industry.
Okay, thank you. And the big mutual fund companies like Fidelity and Vanguard, are they getting into the ESG space in terms of providing those options for their clients?
So they do. I think especially for if you're thinking about Fidelity and Vanguard, that there's just such large companies that they will have a subsect of some sort of ESG fund. Now, whether it's integrated into the firm's DNA is a whole different issue, because as a fund, as a company, as an asset management firm that large, that's not going to be as integrated into their DNA as, for example, Trillium. Trillium is a wonderful asset management company that's led by a diverse woman, or Exponent is another wonderful um, uh, investment company, asset management company that's led by Black women. So, but I'm listing those because it really gives you the idea that they have it interwoven into their DNA, because you can see it through the board of directors, you can see it through the leadership, you can see it in how they speak about, how they write about diversity, impact, and ESG on their websites.
Okay.
So I encourage you to take a look at each asset management firm's websites, because if they're not talking about it on the website as a company as a whole, then they're not as focused on it as another company may be.
That's very, very helpful information. I have another student that has a question, who's not from the Marshall School of Business, is not a finance major. What do you recommend for them to maybe break into the world of finance, or conferences or internships, or any advice for our students who are not a business major but wanting to work in the world of finance?
I would say get involved in the student investment club. I don't think I graduated in 2012. My memory is kind of, I don't know how these student clubs are ran now, but there are other ways to get involved in investing without a business degree. If you really want to take a look at maybe the CFA, if you want to go into finance, that is the gold standard. So those are some of the avenues that you could start learning, and then turning on Bloomberg, listening to how people talk about the markets, just so you have the vocabulary.
Yes, that's excellent advice, Mimi. Okay, here's another question from an alum. You gave the example of $5 million to invest. This alum has $5,000 to invest and says, how can we use the strategies you mentioned? And is there anything to be mindful of when we're investing with ESG or impact investing?
I would say it's the same as I mentioned earlier on really just looking at the DNA of the firm before you invest. So if you are, even if you're starting small and you want to be investing in ESG, you can use any of the tickers that I mentioned earlier, ESG E, ESGU, ESGD. And those are just the ETFs of like the S&P 500, a FTSE, of emerging markets. And they're ETFs, so they're low cost. That's the other thing that I should mention, where if you're investing in impact in ESG, the fees are typically going to be higher. But even as an ETF, I think the fees are less than 0.1%. So
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, I think that concludes our questions. There was alumna Lauren Crocker said, just wanted to share that if anyone is looking to start a career in impact lending, look up community development, financial institutions, or community development banking opportunities. I work for a nonprofit lender, and I'm happy to connect with any recent grad or alumni. So that's from Lauren Crocker. So thank you, Lauren, for sending that and giving us that information. And thank you, Mimi, for sharing 3 nights. You're in Manhattan, so it's like almost 9 o'clock there. And you shared 3 nights with the USC Trojan family and your amazing expertise, education, and all the knowledge that you have from being at Rockefeller Capital Management. We thank you so much for that. And then we have a few more slides that we're going to share the screen. We're going to share the screen because we have another event coming up, which is on, it's our last, oh, here we go. Great, thank you. So this is day 4. So we're going to look at the day 4 slide because there's one more event coming up this evening. And the topic is a really popular one, side hustles, building wealth through multiple sources of income. And that will be led by my esteemed colleague, Sarah O. And we have 3 dynamic speakers. So please join us at 7 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time for our last session of this 4-day conference. And I want to give a big shout out to Sarah O. Sarah, can you come on now and so we can see your face? I want to say a big thank you to Sarah O. She planned this 4-day financial literacy conference. And let me tell you, we started the conference during the pandemic in 2020. We had 300 people registered. This year in 2024, because of Sarah's leadership, we have over 8,000 people registered for this 4-day conference. And it's all because of her amazing leadership. And I just want you to see her beautiful face and give her all her flowers and props for the amazing work that she's done. So yay, virtual applause to Sarah for her amazing work. And she found Mimi. I mean, she just has done so much for this conference and we appreciate her so much. There is a post-conference, post-session survey. Please fill that out. You'll see the QR code there. And we want to thank our campus partners. The Alumni Association did a great job of pushing the conference out to our alumni. And shall we say fight on, Mimi and Sarah? You'll have to unmute, Sarah.
Yes, let's do it.
Okay, fight on, Trojan.
Fight on.
have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming. Bye, everyone.